So, when we go through all of that documentation, when we follow it from the beginning, when we outline all of the different levels of teaching and the different levels of assent that are called for, we're going to see something very clear. We're going to see something very consistent, but it's a lot. And there are places for withholding assent to these different types of teaching. Because for a lot of people, they have a lot of difficulties with understanding the magisterium of the church, understanding their obligations towards the magisterium, understanding their obligations towards an ecumenical council, or maybe the Pope, or maybe a Roman congregation like the DDF, formerly known as the CDF. Maybe it's the USCCB they're wondering about. Maybe it's their local bishop. They have some confusion over what kind of assent they have to give. They have confusion about whether they are able to dissent from it. They have confusion about public dissent. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of weird memes on the internet when it comes to the way in which the magisterium functions, when it comes to the level of assent that we're called to magisterial declarations. You kind of have this weird two-way, or at least there are opposed errors on this point. Because on the one hand, what you have for a lot of people is what they basically think is that unless a teaching is infallible, unless a teaching is definitively set forward in an ex cathedra statement or set forward by an ecumenical council, unless it's set forward to that degree, then you just don't got to listen to it. This is their idea of magisteriology. And on the other hand, you have an equally erroneous position. In this position, practically wipes out any ability for there to be, in any circumstance, a withholding of assent. Or maybe in a bit more of a moderate way of putting it, there are some who say that it is never acceptable to ever propose publicly in any setting any sort of withholding of assent. So you have these two opposed, contrary positions. But what we really have to do is we really have to dive into a lot of the documentation on this, because there are a lot of documents from the magisterium stretching back decades and decades, which outline this teaching. It's not unclear. There's teachings from Vatican II. There's teachings within the Code of Canon Law. There's teachings from the CDF. There's teachings from the popes. There's teachings from the USCCB on this. And there are explanations that are given by individuals who were involved in drafting those documents, like Cardinal Ratzinger, for example. So when we go through all of that documentation, when we follow it from the beginning, when we outline all of the different levels of teaching and the different levels of assent that are called for, we're going to see something very clear. We're going to see something very consistent, but it's a lot. I originally was just going to do a stream or maybe a short video just on the issue of public dissent. But I kind of realized as I got into it, what I needed to do in order to explain it properly to you guys is I needed to start from the beginning. I kind of needed to outline all of the different degrees of teaching in order for you to contextualize this degree of teaching. Because it can be quite complicated. But once you have the proper distinctions in mind, once you go through the documents, it actually becomes quite clear. So I drew from basically every single document that I could find that discussed this. I reread all of them today in order to formulate all my notes for this. And I made a slideshow because I think on particularly a very delicate issue like this, a very delicate issue where you can probably think of people who are engaging in this sort of behavior, I think it's especially important that what we have to do is we have to go through all of the documents in order to make all of the proper qualifications. We got to just go through all of them. Okay, so I left out some. If there is something that you're particularly confused by, I presented all of the different documents, major documents that discuss this. There's minor documents that discuss this. So on the first slide, you're going to see all of the documents that you can go and read yourself. On certain issues, I didn't exactly add in all of the different statements on this. For example, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different statements on the obligation to the assent of faith to definitive teachings. Obviously, I only included a few of them just for illustration purposes. So on certain slides are also going to be, in my notes on the slide, you can see that I direct you to a different place. So if there's something you're particularly confused about, you can go there. But This is going to be a long one, guys. So you guys need to lock in. I'm locked in. I'm strapped in. But you guys need to just lock in, pay attention, because we're going to go through everything. And before I begin, at the end, I'll answer all the super chats. So if you send a super chat, I don't answer it immediately. That's just not how I do it on these sorts of shows, because it kind of ruins the flow. But where I want to begin is I kind of want to begin with just the most general overview before I get into my slides, because I think a general overview helps you understand when we descend into particulars, okay? So when we're talking about the teaching of the magisterium of the church, there are three levels, three broad levels. On the third level, you can really add a lot of different distinctions, and really there are an almost infinite amount of distinctions on the third level. And you'll see why, and I'll explain why. But when you have the first level, everybody knows about it. These are things which are called de fide credenda. De fide credenda means that this is something which is revealed by God, and it is something which is proposed infallibly for our belief. So these are teachings of ex cathedra statements. These are certain teachings of ecumenical councils. These are certain teachings of what we will explain in a little bit, but of the ordinary and universal magisterium. These teachings right there, they require the assent of theological faith. With the assent of theological faith, you believe it because God has revealed it. Your belief is irrevocable. So if you deny this, you are a heretic. So that's that first level or first paragraph of teachings. If you think about, for example, the contents of the Apostles' Creed, the contents of the Nicene Creed, major dogmas, well, all dogmas, these are going to be contained under this first category of teaching. You cannot deny those under any circumstances. If you deny it, you're a heretic, okay? And you receive the penalties if you are judged to be acting in a way that is obstinate, okay? And then the second paragraph, or the second category, we also have teachings which are infallibly taught, but they're not infallibly taught as revealed. So they're infallibly taught as somehow connected with divine revelation. So, for example, the big controversy over something like the canonization of saints. The canonization of saints is something which is infallibly taught, but it's obviously not something which is itself divinely revealed, because we don't have continuing public revelation after the time of the apostles. So that's not something which is contained in the first category. So those in the second category, they are in error. These are things which are called de fide tenenda, or things to be held. Okay. And the basis of this isn't necessarily the fact that this is revealed. Rather, it's the extension of the church's authority. So the fact that the church, in order to be able to integrally teach divine revelation, doesn't only, well, the church needs to go beyond just divine revelation, because there are certain things which are either logically or historically connected with the deposit of faith that need to be taught. For example, the church needs to be able to infallibly teach on whether something is an ecumenical council or not, or be able to infallibly teach on who the Pope is. These are things which are integral to the church's mission. So these are things which have to be able to be infallibly taught by the church. But they're not things which are revealed, and therefore they don't have that same formal reason for the assent. It's not assent of divine faith. Rather, it's something to be held, and it's on the basis of faith in the church's authority in these matters. So that's the second paragraph. We can think about a bunch of them. I named a few of them, but we'll get into a few more in the slides themselves. But then you have the most controversial category. The most controversial category is the third category. So the third category, or third paragraph teachings, these third paragraph teachings are concerned with things that are said to be non-definitively taught. Things which are non-definitively taught are not taught in a way that is infallible. So this can be teachings of your bishop. This can be teachings of your Episcopal conference. This can be teachings of a synod. This can be teachings of the magisterium. Well, all of them are teachings of the magisterium. This can be teachings of the Pope. This can be teachings of a Roman congregation. There are many different ways in which the magisterium teaches certain things, and these things have an almost infinite degree. There's lots of different categories and lots of different degrees of emphasis rather. So everything from your bishop teaching in a matter that has a lot of contingent circumstances in it, all the way to the Pope teaching basically just a little bit below his full plenitude of his authority, or even an ecumenical council teaching just a smidgen below its full plenitude of authority. And obviously, when it comes to the degree in which one has of assent to this and the obligations to assent, it's going to consist of a lot of different factors. It's going to consist of that degree of authority in which it's taught. It's going to consist in the questions of how many contingent matters are contained in this problem. It's going to consist in who you are. Are you a professional theologian who has been studying these matters for 60 years, or are you a catechumen? These are going to make a very big difference in the type of expectation one can have towards that teaching. But broadly, we refer to this teaching, or the teaching about this degree of assent, we refer to this assent as obsequium religiosum. You've probably heard religious submission, or maybe religious submission of intellect and will. So this is a certain impulse. It's internal, not merely external, but it's an internal impulse towards a supposition of correctness on the part of the magisterium due to the general guidance of the Spirit. Now, there are circumstances in which one withholds assent, and there are circumstances in which one perhaps may, even in the public sphere, at least public in terms of the way in which we use that term normally in English, which this is going to, as the USCCB points out, we use terms a little bit differently in English, like dissent and public, to where this can cause some confusion. But there are circumstances in which one can somehow express certain arguments against some of these teachings in the public forum. And there are places for withholding assent to these different types of teaching.